The night I chose Elspeth Vane, she did not know she was being chosen. She did not know I was standing 6 feet behind her stepmother when Lady Alcott said it. She did not know I had been watching her for the better part of an hour, not the way a man watches a woman he finds pretty, though I did find her that, eventually, in the way that particular kind of intelligence makes a face interesting, but the way I used to watch a new recruit who moved differently from the others. Quieter, more deliberate. Carrying something the rest of the company hadn't been given, or hadn't found a use for yet. I had spent many years in service to the Crown before inheriting Ashfern, and the habit of observation had never left me. I could read a room the way other men read a newspaper, the headlines first, then the smaller notices. The headlines at Lady Harcastle's autumn party were predictable enough, the usual arrangement of ambition and anxiety that passes for society. Men performing consequence, women performing either submission or authority, depending on their age and their position. The young girls performing availability, the matrons performing contentment. Everyone in their assigned roles, all of them watching each other with the particular intensity of people who are not watching at all, but being watched. Elspeth Vane was not performing anything. She was standing near the east window with a small glass of ratafia she had not touched, and she was looking at the musicians, not glancing at them, not using them as a socially acceptable direction to aim her eyes while she composed her expression or waited for someone to notice her. She was actually listening to what they were playing, and the specific quality of her attention, a slight forward lean, a head tilted at 3 degrees, the absolute stillness of a person whose mind is engaged and whose body has simply stopped bothering, was different from everything else in the room. I had been crossing toward her for perhaps 10 minutes, moving the way I'd learned to move at formal events. Unhurried, with clear purpose, never directly, because a direct line in a room like this reads as impatience, and impatience is the one quality a man in my position cannot afford to advertise. I had paused twice, once to speak with Harcastle himself, who wanted to discuss drainage management with an enthusiasm that bordered on the evangelical, and once to receive a glass of something from a footman. I was, perhaps, 8 feet from the east window when Lady Alcott appeared at my left shoulder. She did not see me. She was focused entirely on the 2 people she was moving toward. Her biological daughter, Cecily, who was stationed near the fireplace in a position that suggested careful arrangement, and Mrs. Pembury Cross, who was one of those women whose primary social function is to receive the confidences of more forceful personalities. Lady Alcott had identified me as an objective from the moment I arrived. She was good enough at this particular game that I had registered her registration, and had been, in an entirely impersonal way, avoiding the direct line of engagement. She had taken a different approach. She was staging a performance for my benefit, and she had no idea I was close enough to hear it without trying. "She means well, of course," Lady Alcott was saying, in the tone of a woman who has carefully selected pity as her most effective weapon for the evening. "She always means well, but you know how it is with girls who have been too much indoors, too quiet, too bookish. Men find it, a deliberate pause, choosing the word with the precision of someone selecting the right instrument, unsettling." Mrs. Pembury Cross made a sound of sympathetic confirmation. "Nobody will ever want her," Lady Alcott said. She said it lightly, almost kindly, with the fond, helpless resignation of a woman who has surveyed the situation and reached the only reasonable conclusion that the facts permit. As if it were simply a known truth about the world, the way it is known that certain wines do not travel and certain investments do not mature. Nobody will ever want her. Said of a woman who was standing less than 12 feet away, in a room where 12 feet is nothing. Said at a volume calculated to be precisely audible to Mrs. Pembury Cross, and precisely not audible to Elspeth Vane. A calculation that required, I realized, knowing the exact angle, the exact pitch of the ambient music, and the precise level of ambient conversation in that corner of the room. She had done this before. It was not spontaneous cruelty, it was practiced. I stood very still. I am not a man given to impulsive decisions. I had held commands in conditions where an impulsive decision was the last one a man ever made, and the discipline of thinking before moving had long since become not a conscious choice, but simply the way I operated. I weigh before I act. I consider the ground. I identify what I know, what I don't know, and what the likely consequences of each available action will be before I commit to any of them. All of this weighing happened in approximately 3 seconds, and every path through it arrived at the same destination. I crossed the room, not toward Lady Alcott, who had already moved on to some other piece of social maneuvering, and would not have understood, in any case, that what I was doing was an answer to her. I crossed the room toward the east window, where Elspeth Vane was standing with her untouched ratafia and her 3-degree head tilt, and her quality of attention that was unlike anything else in that particular room. And I came to stand beside her with the quiet arrival of a man who has decided where he is going to be. "Vivaldi," I said. She turned. I had not had a clear view of her face from across the room. Angles and distance and candlelight had given me an impression of composure, of dark hair arranged simply, of a dress that was correct without making any particular declaration of wealth. Up close, what I noticed first were her eyes. They were gray. Not the diluted, unconvincing gray that is sometimes described as silver or as the color of winter mist over ornamental water. A real gray, dense and specific. The gray of good stone, of October sky in the hour before rain, of something that has weight and will not dissolve under examination. She looked at me with those gray eyes for a moment that was neither long nor short, but simply complete, and then she said, "The 4 Seasons, Autumn, 3rd movement. You recognized it from here." "I've been listening since the 2nd bar." She paused for exactly the right interval. "Your Grace." She knew who I was then. This did not surprise me in a room of this size. At an event of this description, most people would. What surprised me was the order of it. The music first. The title second. The acknowledgement of my rank delivered as a postscript to something she had found more immediately worth noting. It was either very carefully calculated, which I considered unlikely on short acquaintance, or it was simply honest, which I found considerably more interesting. "Do you play?" I asked. "Badly," she said, without hesitation and without apology. "I have a better ear than hands. My teacher found it frustrating." "What did you find it?" She considered the question. I noticed that she actually considered it. There was a pause that was not decorative, not the artificial moment of feminine reflection that is deployed to suggest thoughtfulness, while actually delivering a pre-prepared answer, but the genuine small silence of someone thinking about what they actually believe before they say it. "Honest," she said. "It's useful, I think, to understand the distance between what you can hear and what you can do. It prevents certain kinds of confusion." I looked at her for a moment. The candlelight was doing something particular to the planes of her face, and the dark window behind her made the light more defined, and she was looking back at me with an expression that contained no performance and no anticipation and no apology. She was simply there, present in the way that very few people manage to be present in rooms designed expressly for the purpose of display. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced," I said. "We haven't." She did not offer her name or suggest that this might be remedied. She waited. I liked that. I liked it with a specificity that surprised me. "I'm told," I said, "that Hardcastle keeps a tolerable library. I've been meaning to investigate the claim. I wonder if you might be persuaded to assist with the investigation." "Yes," she said. "Not what an unusual proposal, Your Grace. Not I should perhaps find with a glance toward wherever Lady Alcott had positioned herself. Not the performance of hesitation, the display of reluctance, the careful management of eagerness. Just, yes. As if the answer had been entirely clear from the moment the question arrived, and she saw no reason to obscure it. The library at Hardcastle was, in fact, excellent. I know this because we spent 40 minutes in it, and I paid attention to approximately none of it in the sense of cataloging the collection, because I was otherwise occupied. I was occupied in the way I had not been occupied in conversation for a very long time. The way you are occupied when the person you're talking to is actually saying things, and the things they're saying require you to actually think. We discussed the Vivaldi. We discussed Handel, whom she found more rigorous and less sentimental, a distinction I found myself agreeing with more than I had expected. We moved, in a progression that felt entirely natural and only slightly improbable in retrospect, from Handel to the management of river flooding in the southern counties, because she had been reading a committee report on the subject and had views about the proposed drainage solutions that were, to my considerable interest, better informed than those of most men I had discussed the matter with. She had opinions about silting. She had opinions about the misallocation of engineering resources. She had a clear and undecorated grasp of why the proposed upstream intervention would create 3 new problems for everyone it solved. I have commanded men in the field. I have sat across tables from ministers and generals and men whose professional occupation was to know things and to know them quickly. In 40 minutes in a room full of books, Elspeth Vane showed me a mind as good as any I had encountered. I was aware at some point in the second half of those 40 minutes that I was going to call at Alcott House. I was aware, at a slightly later point, that I was going to call for a specific reason that had nothing to do with Cecily, and that Lady Alcott was going to understand this, and that her understanding of it was going to be considerably less comfortable than her expectation of the call had been. I found I did not mind this at all. I called at Alcott House on the 3rd morning after the Harcastle party. This was unusual. Men in my position do not call, not in the direct, frontal way that is understood to constitute a declaration. I correspond. I arrange to be elsewhere when others are present. I give the impression of arriving at things gradually, because arriving at things gradually is, in most circumstances, the correct tactical approach. A direct call, presented in the morning, to the house of a woman with 2 unmarried daughters, means something very specific in the language that governs these transactions, and I was relying on Lady Alcott to understand it. She did. She was in the morning room when I was admitted, with Cecily arranged beside her in the kind of chair that suggests youth and grace, and everything carefully considered, and the expression on Lady Alcott's face was the expression of a chess player who has just seen what she believes is the move she has been waiting for. She greeted me with the warmth of a woman who has rehearsed warmth until it is available on demand. She asked about my journey, about the weather, about whether I found London agreeable in the autumn. I let her talk. She was good at it. She was, in the particular way of women who have spent their lives navigating this world, formidably skilled at the management of social surfaces, at maintaining the appearance of a conversation while actually conducting a negotiation, at guiding a room toward her preferred conclusion without appearing to steer. She talked about the Harcastle party. She mentioned how charming the music had been. She mentioned the East Corridor and the flowers, and how lovely the east end of the house had looked in the candlelight. And all of this was navigation, the careful laying of a path from the east window, where she had seen me speaking with someone, toward the conclusion that the someone was Cecily, or at least that she might reasonably pretend to have believed this until the formal declaration arrived. In the pause she left for Cecily to fill with something charming and appropriate, I said, I had hoped to speak with Miss Vane. The silence that followed had a texture. Lady Alcott managed it with the technique of a woman who has managed many silences. The expression on her face did not rearrange itself into anything as uncontrolled as confusion or displeasure. It simply held for a fraction of a second longer than a natural expression would hold, and then it settled into something that was the precise shape of warmth, while being emptied of whatever genuine warmth had been in preparation for a different moment. Elspeth, she said. If she's at home, I said. She is, yes, she is at home, she's a breath. A recalibration at a speed that I recognized and respected even as I declined to accommodate it. I'll have her sent for. Cecily was present throughout this, and I will say in her favor that she conducted herself with more grace than her mother. She sat correctly in her chair and made agreeable conversation, and did not, by any expression or movement, indicate that she found the situation unjust. Whatever she felt about it, she kept it private. I thought better of her for that. Elspeth came in as if she had been in the middle of something. This was exactly the quality I had noticed at Harcastle, the impression of a person who has a life that does not arrange itself around social performances, and who arrives at social performances from the middle of that life, rather than suspending the life entirely in order to perform. She stopped for a fraction of a second in the doorway, the specific fraction of a second of a person integrating new information, not performing surprise, but actually registering something unexpected and deciding what to do with it. And then she came into the room and said my name correctly and waited. I was hoping you might continue what you were telling me the other night, I said. About the Medway drainage proposals, I've been thinking about the upstream intervention problem. Lady Alcott's expression made a journey. Elspeth looked at me with those gray October eyes, and something in the far corner of her mouth made a very small decision in the direction of a smile, and she said, I'm afraid I've read further since then. My views have become more complicated. Good, I said, I have time. We were not left alone together, of course. Lady Alcott remained present, and the conversation was conducted entirely within the understood limits of a morning call, which meant that the drainage proposals were discussed in somewhat more abbreviated form than either of us might have preferred, and that the broader subject of the committee report's structural weaknesses was deferred to future occasions. But what happened in that morning room was clear enough to anyone who was paying attention, and several people were paying attention. I called again 4 days later, and again the following week. And on the third occasion, I asked Lady Alcott for the particular conversation with Elspeth that would require a degree of privacy, and Lady Alcott granted it with the expression of a woman who has restructured her expectations and found a position from which she can present the restructuring as a success. We sat in the smaller drawing room, the one that gives onto the garden at the back of the house, and I said what I had come to say, which was that I wished to marry her if she would have me, and that I was aware she had no particular reason to know me well enough to answer, and that I was prepared to consider whatever additional time or information would be useful to her in arriving at her answer. She was quiet for a moment that I recognized, the genuine thoughtful pause, the considered silence. "Why me?" she said. It was not a fishing question. It was not the performance of surprise or the invitation to reassurance. It was a real question, asked with the directness of a woman who has decided that pretending not to want answers is a waste of time that could otherwise be used for better things. I thought about what to say. I could have said, because you were listening to the second violinist when no one else in the room was listening to anything. Because you told me you play badly and offered the information without either apology or self-deprecation, simply as a fact that you found useful to know. Because in 40 minutes in a library, you treated the question of southern drainage infrastructure as a subject worth thinking about clearly. And you were right, too. And the clarity of your thinking was better than most of what I have encountered in rooms where thinking is supposed to be the point. I said, I was standing behind your stepmother at the Harcastle party. The quality of her stillness changed. She was speaking to Mrs. Pembury Cross, I said. She did not see me. Elspeth did not say what did she say. She already knew the shape of what had been said, not the specific words, perhaps, but the shape. She had been standing close enough to understand the event if not to hear it, and she had been living inside the pattern of those events for long enough that the specific occasion at Harcastle was likely distinguishable from the others only by setting. She said nobody would ever want me, Elspeth said. Yes. A silence. And you. Cross the room, I said. The garden was doing something autumnal behind the windows, the specific red gold of a late October afternoon, leaves moving in a wind we couldn't hear through the glass, the light doing what light does at that time of year, which is to make everything look briefly more significant than it is, or perhaps as significant as it actually is, and we normally fail to see. Elspeth was looking at me steadily. You crossed the room, she said, to prove her wrong. I crossed the room, I said, because I had been watching you for 20 minutes and had already decided to cross the room. She simply, I paused, finding the precise word, clarified the ground. Clarified the ground, she repeated, not mocking it, weighing it. She made it very clear, the ground was already there. Elspeth looked at me for another moment. Then she turned and looked at the garden, the red gold and the gray light and the particular quality of the afternoon. And when she turned back, the small thing in the corner of her mouth had made its mind up. That, she said, is an honest answer. I've had several weeks to consider whether there was a better one. And there isn't. She was quiet for a moment more. Then, the drainage proposals, the upstream intervention. Yes. I've read the full engineering survey now. The committee was working from incomplete data on the Medway flow rate. The numbers they've used for the floodplain capacity are drawn from a dry year. I looked at her. That is, I said carefully, exactly what I suspected when I read the summary. I had not yet obtained the full survey. I can lend it to you, she said. After I tell you that yes, she said, with the same simple directness with which she had said yes in the Harcastle library when I asked if she wished to see the books. I will marry you. We married in November. The church was old, older than the title, older than several of the traditions the title had accumulated, and it smelled of cold stone and beeswax and the particular combination of must and incense that very old English churches carry as a permanent feature, like the dates carved into the walls. The light was flat and silver, the light of November having made its decision about the year and committed to it. Elspeth walked in wearing a dress that was the color of winter morning, and she walked the way she did everything, without performance, without the self-conscious management of an important occasion, simply present and moving forward with a settled quality that I have come to understand is not the absence of feeling but the presence of something stronger, the capacity to feel things deeply and not to be undone by them. Lady Alcott attended. She sat in the third row, behind my sister and my cousin Harcastle and his wife, behind 3 other people whose names I could supply if asked, and she was wearing an expression that had been assembled with care and maintained throughout the ceremony with the technique of a woman for whom no social occasion, however unwelcome, presents a surface she cannot manage. Cecily sat beside her and was gracious, as she had been gracious throughout, which I noted and respected. Elspeth did not look at them. She looked at me, when the moment came to look at me, with the gray eyes and the settled quality and the small thing in the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile, and not quite something else but was, I had come to understand, her full expression of a feeling she found entirely adequate for the occasion. I looked back with the directness of a man who crossed a room once on an instinct sharpened by 20 minutes of genuine attention, and who has not found reason in all the weeks since to question the instinct. There are decisions I have made in my life that required revision. There are judgments I have made that the subsequent evidence has not supported. This is not one of them. Nobody will ever want her. I heard it from 6 feet away, in a room full of people performing themselves, standing behind a woman who calculated her cruelties to the precise inch, and had no idea that the calculation had an audience. I crossed the room. I will cross it every morning for the rest of my life, if that is what is required, which it is not, because she is already there, in the chair by the east window, or at the desk where the committee reports accumulate with the annotations in her precise handwriting, or at the piano playing badly and with full knowledge of it, listening to what she can do with more attention than most people give to what they can do well. She is already there, and the room, wherever the room happens to be, is better for it. She is there, she always was. They simply failed to cross the room,